Hi class, Summer here. Today I'm going to be talking about how great whales transfer nutrients vertically along the water column and horizontally along regions of the ocean, and how their fecal plumes fertilize phytoplankton along the way. For this project, I reviewed probably 20 different scientific peer-reviewed papers, but I want to start with a scientific book I think we're all familiar with. Everyone Poops. The author goes through and discusses fecal matter of many different great beasts. But when it comes to the whale, there are questions for both children and parents. What does whale poop look like? And you may be wondering, what does this even have to do with oceanic and atmospheric processes? Well, it turns out quite a lot. Here you have it, a somewhat majestic photo of the sperm whale. Here, this number 2 has less of a traditional look and more of a floating fecal plume. Also note towards the left that it's being excreted at the surface. So now that I've hooked you in with some charismatic megafauna and a classic children's book, let's talk a little bit about what fecal plumes have to do with mitigating climate change. These floating microalgae or phytoplankton photosynthesize at the surface of the ocean. This pulls CO2 from the atmosphere and turns it into organic carbon, a process that pulls the equivalent of 4 Amazon rainforests out of the atmosphere. The single-cell nature of many phytoplankton make it more efficient at primary production than terrestrial organisms, allowing nutrients in marine environments to be converted to biomass very quickly. The 2 factors that affect phytoplankton growth are sunlight and nutrients. Primary productivity of phytoplankton happens in the euphotic zone, which literally means good light. Phytoplankton also need nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, iron, and silica. For phytoplankton to grow, it requires all these things, and when one is not available, productivity is limited. Iron is an important nutrient. It allows the synthesis of chlorophyll and the production of cells. Iron is extremely abundant on Earth, but not really so much in marine environments. So we need a few abiotic processes to get iron to the euphotic zone in the ocean. One of the ways we get iron to the euphotic zone is through atmospheric dust. This comes mostly from mid-latitude regions that are arid or near anthropogenic sources in highly populated areas. Dust, especially small particles, can travel quite far and is deposited thousands of kilometers away. Iron is also transported through the deposition from rivers and upwelling of deep sea nutrient-rich water by ocean currents that bring iron to the surface and increase productivity in certain coastal areas of the globe. The lighter colors of the ocean on this world map represent chlorophyll and therefore plankton. And the map on the right shows a few upwelling zones. In the last decade, research has emerged on the importance of nutrient transfer by great whales, who provide nutrients both laterally in the water column and horizontally across regions. Whales can transfer nutrients vertically by eating in the deep ocean and then defecating at the surface when they come up to breathe. When whales dive, the hydrostatic pressure changes their body function and pulls blood away from non-essential organs, actually making it more efficient for a whale to save their defecating for the surface. Whales also eat an iron-rich diet, but they don't assimilate much because iron isn't really needed for their blubber. Whale fecal plumes contain 10 million times more iron than the surface water. In experimental lab studies, scientists collected samples from pygmy blue whales and dried and crushed the whale fecal matter. They found that the higher the fecal concentration, the higher the growth rates in all phytoplankton they studied. We are so desperate for phytoplankton growth that researchers have tried schemes where they actually fertilize the marine euphotic zone with iron. This faux fertilization had many drawbacks, including altering food webs and increasing algal blooms. Remember all the iron in whale fecal plumes? The iron-rich whale feces is on par with the amount of iron introduced in these fertilization schemes. When the whales fertilize their own feeding areas, they're providing a positive nutrient feedback loop for themselves. In addition to increasing nutrients, whales also increase phytoplankton numbers by consuming copepods that eat the phytoplankton and therefore releasing herbivory pressure. Researchers McCarthy and Roman analyzed fecal samples from humpback whales and found higher NH4 and higher productivity. In areas with higher fecal matter, there was 50 times the primary production rate of phytoplankton. Whales also move nutrients around on the sea floor, suspending it in the water column for use of other organisms. They create bubble nets, which allow for ocean mixing, and gray whales plow the seafloor to hunt for amphipods. Without this vertical movement of nutrients, these nutrients are lost to the deep sea and unavailable to biota in the euphotic zone, requiring these organisms to make use of slower methods of nutrient transfer like tectonic processes or ocean upwelling to make nutrients available. Also, just the essence of living sinks carbon. For example, the fin whale can live for 2 centuries, storing a mass of carbon in their bodies the whole time. The final vertical movement of a whale can also be an ecosystem service. A sinking whale at the end of its life is called a whale fall. The carcass essentially brings atmospheric carbon and nutrients it has accumulated and stores it in the deep sea. At pre-whaling levels, whale falls would have brought 160,000 tons of carbon into the deep ocean. Biomass in these benthic areas can be stored for thousands to millions of years. The whale conveyor belt is another process of nutrient transfer where whale defecation is brought horizontally along the ocean from nutrient-rich feeding grounds to nutrient-poor breeding grounds. In warmer areas, nitrogen and phosphorus limit phytoplankton growth, but in colder areas, iron limits phytoplankton growth. Whales bring all of these limiting nutrients with them. In the Southern Ocean, blue whales are estimated to move 88 tons of nitrogen to lower productive areas. Vertical nutrients provided by the whales are also used indirectly by anadromous fish, which then bring the nutrients to land. As researchers note, nutrients flow against entropy from the ocean depths to the continental interiors. Nutrient transfer by great whales plays a significant role in regulating the climate through increased phytoplankton growth and carbon fixation. Wherever whales go, phytoplankton increases, and CO2 is sequestered from the atmosphere. Increasing whales from their current global population of 1.3 million to their pre-whaling numbers of 4 to 5 million would significantly increase phytoplankton growth. This would capture 1.7 billion tons of CO2. While I don't have time for all of the other ecosystem services that whales provide, it's worth noting that while some commercial fishery systems once suggested culling whales to increase fish biomass, the concept of the whale pump suggests that whales may be increasing productivity to the ecosystem as a whole by recycling nutrients to the productive surface zones. Areas with decreased great whale populations have seen a decrease in biodiversity resulting from trophic cascades, which can negatively impact fisheries management. Now for some policy. After 1,000 years of commercial whaling, genetic research shows that whale populations decreased by 90%. The popular culture Save the Whales movement in the 1970s did tremendous service by pushing forward legislation to ban whaling. Society recognized that whale populations were depleting and were drawn to protecting these charismatic, interesting, and intelligent creatures. The frameworks for marine protection began in the 1980s. Successful interventions including the Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species in 1975 and the 1982 moratorium on commercial whaling. Humpback whales in the Southern Hemisphere rebounded from a few hundred to 40,000. Not all species have recovered so quickly, and there are stressors beyond whaling, including ship strikes, fishing net entanglement, noise and plastic pollution, and climate change, all of which require swift political and financial action. The more we learn, the better we can do. Just off the coast where I live in Southern California, it's a hot spot for migrating blue whales and endangered species. It also happens to be an area that moves $300 billion worth of ship cargo through Los Angeles and Long Beach. Currently, the NOAA has a voluntary speed reduction to 10 knots based on historical migration routes. A report out just this year suggested a dynamic ocean management approach, which takes into account changing climate scenarios. Researchers suggest, rather than using historical baselines, that we use daily activities of whales instead. Had this been the practice over the last 17 years, 10% more whales would have been saved without adding additional restricted speed days to the calendar. Dynamic programs like these would help scenarios like the 2014-2016 heat wave, which brought early migration patterns, and the blue whales totally missed the fixed vessel speed window. Researchers suggest that using a combination of acoustic data, sightings, and modeling predictions can help with this dynamic approach. Forward-thinking researcher Carlos Duarte recently discussed building ecosystem resiliency and ecosystem services by rebuilding marine life by 2050 as part of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 14. If it sounds pricey, it is. The estimated cost for protecting 50% of the ocean is $10 to $20 billion a year. But the eventual payback would be $10 for every $1 spent, which would include revenues from ecotourism, job growth, and increased stock to global fisheries. 50 years after the Save the Whales movement from the 1970s and 80s, we still recognize the charisma of whales. But with further scientific research, we understand that we don't just want to save the whales, we need to save the whales so they can perform their jobs as ecosystem engineers. A recent article by the International Monetary Fund valued a single whale at $2 million because of the financial benefits it provides society. Economists at the IMF have declared one whale equal to 1,000 trees in the fight against climate change. These same economists have a profound solution: reduce greenhouse gases by letting whales live, which will help in our efforts to save the humans. Thank you for watching.